Hi, everyone. I think we're about to start. So folks, yeah, are slowly coming into the space. I want to introduce myself. I'll be one of the facilitators alongside Brittany, who is actually a longtime comrade from like my home community in Southern California. So it's like really beautiful to be like reunited in this way. But yeah, a little bit about me. I'm Alex. I use she, her, they, them pronouns respectfully. And I'm actually also an organizer with San Francisco Rising, also organizing around free education. And so it's like really exciting to be brought to this moment and to, yeah, facilitate this session. What I look like, I am a queer Latinx person with long, straight black hair. And I have glasses on, I have headphones on, I'm sitting in a chair, I have a button up orange and white striped shirt with, yeah, a plant to my left. Hopefully it shows up to my left, and some posters in the background. And I will pass it to Brittany.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Brittany. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a student at CCSF, and I'm excited to be here with y'all. For my visual description, I am a queer Latinx woman, cisgender, and I have my short dark brown hair tied up in a ponytail, big gold glasses, and a green crew neck sweatshirt. And then I'm in a room that has a plain white wall and a beige curtain to my left. So yeah, thank you, Alex. Get started.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany. And I think if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we want to acknowledge that San Francisco is located on unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We encourage non-Indigenous members to uplift the work of remateriation, I feel like I struggle with that word, and land taxes. And yeah, I also want to acknowledge that I live and labor on Ohlone land, Chochenyo territory in the East Bay, known as Oakland, California. We want to be intentional with how we are creating Black, Indigenous, and people of color center spaces. We want to move forward by creating practices to prioritize Black, Indigenous, people of color members and proactively decenter whiteness and dismantle white supremacy, anti-Blackness, misogyny, and colorism. Because of that, we will open our facilitated discussion to be open only to BIPOC first, centering LGBTQ plus and disabled BIPOC, with the last 5 minutes being open to all, such as non-BIPOC folks. We are mindful of creating BIPOC-centered spaces in all breakout rooms. Please DM the person marked host, which I think is Ira today, in this meeting if you are a white person, so that we can mindfully arrange the breakout rooms. The chat is open to everyone. However, we ask white folks to please be mindful over taking up too much space. The Zoom sessions will continue to be open for anyone to join. Yeah, I also want to name that we have a mutual aid fund that will go towards paying our speakers who are presenting with us, with payments towards Black, Indigenous, people of color speakers prioritized. Please contribute to the fund if you are a less systems impacted person who is benefiting from the space. The Zoom moderators will post the link in the chat.
And then before we go on, I realized that I didn't introduce the topic, and then we have announcements also. So just real quick, today we will be discussing free education as human rights, and we're joined by Free CUNY. CUNY CUNY stands for the Free University, Free City University, of New York. And they are fighting for free anti-racist education. And we'll be joined by the CCSF Collective members, Alexis Yonan, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, Yonan and Ira, alongside with CCSF PUSO, PUSO, that stands for Philippine-U.S. Solidarity Organization, member Win-Mon Kyi, who wrote and passed the state resolution in 2020 on free community college. And then I believe Alex also has an announcement for an event.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Brittany. Yeah, I also want to talk on the collective care coordinators, Tiara and Kari, who will be providing collective care during the session with BIPOC folks prioritized. So please DM them if you feel triggered or re-traumatized by the content being discussed. If you need to be provided with care resources or need to go into a breakout breakout room with someone to care for you, like please just let us know. Our Zoom moderators will share the anonymous care form in the chat where you can provide feedback on the session. Collective care is central to abolition, as we have learned in our previous sessions. Oh, and Ira has a note about that in the chat. Yeah, we did just totally gloss over announcements. So thanks for bringing us back to that, Brittany. Yeah, I also wanted to make an announcement. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm organizing with San Francisco Rising. And so we actually have an event coming up next weekend called Theory Ain't Shit Without Practice. It's a 2-day mass organizing training, November 5th through 6th. That is completely led by students with guest speakers from the Debt Collective, talking deeper about different types of debt, and day 2 focusing more on like organizing skills, such as like what is organizing, how to hold one-on-ones, strategic relationships, tactics, action planning for our campaign to cancel student debt for our larger vision for free college for all. So yeah, so with that, I can also put the link in our chat if folks are interested. And if people have questions, Sean, maybe you have a question for me.
No. I was just really quickly, because I know that you're really good on like trying to make sure you pronounce people's names right. It's Ira, not Ira. I used to make a mistake as well. So I wanted to try and like, figure out a really cool way of doing that. I hope I wasn't rude.
No, not rude at all. I actually rather have like somebody like pause me than like keep going mispronouncing someone's name.
I didn't want to do that. I don't know. Like I really just did want to interrupt you. I felt like that was hella rude, but yeah, that's why I just raised my hand. Right on.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's actually maybe you could come off mute and just say it.
Yeah, it's Era.
Ara.
Ara.
Even when I
No, thank you. But yeah, thanks for advocating. That's a part of like, central to community care. Cool. And yeah, I think from here, I'll pass it back to Brittany to introduce our first speakers.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so our first speaker is from Free CUNY, from the University of New York. They are a grassroots student and faculty organization fighting for anti-racist and tuition-free education. So thank you.
Hi, hi everyone. Thank you so much to everyone who helped organize this event. I really appreciate it. It's so lovely. And I can see just how much care went into this. I really appreciate it. I am Hailey. I use she, they pronouns. I am part of Free CUNY. I am an East Asian and Southeast Asian USian. I have black and gold glasses on right now. I have a septum piercing. Let me see. I have a messy bookcase in the background with some notes taped to the wall and a calendar to my right. Yeah, I'll let if Sarah, you want to go next, please.
Sure. Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah. I was a part of Free CUNY and I'm jumping back into the working with them now. I was at Brooklyn College for a while as a student and now I'm there as a TA. So I'm still a part of CUNY. And yeah, so just describe what I look like. I have dark brown skin. I have a calendar behind me and I have flowers around the calendar and I'm wearing a black shirt and black glasses. I'll pass them all.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Hey y'all, I'm Moll or Molly. I use they, them pronouns. I organize with Free CUNY, and I am a white non-binary person with blonde, like shoulder-length hair, black and gold glasses. I'm wearing like a tan shirt and a black beanie, and then behind me I have like a pale blue wall and white closet doors in the back, and then a plant in a pink planter. And I'll pass it back to Hailey.
All right, thank you. I also went to Brooklyn College, and I just to circle back to me. I went to Brooklyn College. I worked briefly on a place called the Kingsborough Community College Urban Farm, and I and at the grad center for my master's in liberal studies. And I will also be sharing my screen. I hope that is okay with everyone. And I hope I'll be able to do that pretty okay. Let me know, can folks see this okay? Yeah, I'm gonna keep it in this mode, I think, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so this is our title page. It says Abolition 101, Campus Mapping and Building Abolition at CUNY, and I'll be moving to slide 2. So I wanted to begin thinking about, or we wanted to begin thinking about what abolition specifically means for us as like students at a CUNY institution or a city university of New York. You know, one of the campuses at this very vast university system. So I have like 3 questions that might guide us for us to like answer. And it is like, what are the ways that CUNY funds and benefits from prison and labor from incarcerated people? And I have attached a screenshot of some of the ways that our CUNY both uses labor to labor from incarcerated people to make chairs, desks, etc. And another question would be, what are the ways that CUNY supports prisons and cops ideologically? So this can be in the form of free education for cops, because as like public universities, as like y'all are familiar with, we might be going to school with a cop in training, right? And the other question that might be helpful in framing this is, what are the ways CUNY deploys carceral methods in the classroom, on campus, mental health counseling, etc. So oftentimes, like security cameras or grading can be seen as like carceral logics that are deployed against like students as like punishment for, you know, various other things. And I think we can move on to the next slide, which I will pass on to Sarah to talk about our other topic in the session, which is campus mapping. So Sarah, please.
Sure. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about campus mapping as a tactic of organizing, but I think Free CUNY has employed it in different ways that aren't necessarily just for strategizing for protesting, for example, or strategizing for actions. Campus mapping is really useful for organizations to understand their campus from several community members' points of view, and not just the organizers themselves. So I outlined 3 different ways of campus mapping. So this slide is blue, and it says, what is campus mapping in bold? And the first bullet point is mapping on an actual map. And that's pretty self-explanatory, drawing a map of the campus itself and marking spots that are heavy with student traffic, maybe heavy with policing, places that are safe, as safe as you can get in a university, places that you and your people really enjoy being in, places that y'all can meet at and that you know you can go to if you would need to meet with your people. Offices of staff and faculty that you think you can turn to, and student resource offices are just some examples of things that you can include on your map. And that, of course, restricts your map to the university itself. But I think going to a university or a college that is deeply implanted into communities that existed before, or exist in a relationship with the university itself, a lot of these maps can and should, in my opinion, extend beyond your campus itself into the community around you. And then the second bullet says word maps, and that's mapping thoughts and lines of thinking around a concept. And something that Free CUNY does often is mapping the answers to the question, what does a Free CUNY mean to you? And I'll talk about the third point and then we'll go to the pictures, mapping through pictures. So 2 unaffiliated CUNY students created Instagram pages that document broken infrastructure across the campuses. And that there isn't some big amalgamation of all these images together in one. It's all just documented and kept archived on Instagram pages. So that's another form of mapping. So we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Hailey. Yeah, so this is what the mapping through words look like. So we have how do we get to a free CUNY or just free CUNY in the center. And these were done at meetings, big or small, that generated a lot of conversation. And I think really begged students to think more critically about what a free CUNY can look like and what the differences are between the current university that they're at and the ones that we radically imagine together. And for a while, this, or at least in the beginnings of free CUNY, this was just an exercise that we did sort of just to get sort of like an icebreaker, honestly, to get people talking and feel more comfortable. But these images rolled and developed into our demands as an organization. So these something that seems like sort of a one-off thing that we do, you know, if we have a big enough turnout or if we just need to, you know, break the ice, rolled and developed and got bigger and bigger into our actual demands. And these, of course, were made with the input of community members. Even if this was the only meeting they came to for free CUNY, their ideas were still heard and, of course, still considered as we developed as an org into creating demands. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And these are screenshots from the Instagram. So the bottom left picture is a picture of a sink that's been put cardboard over the actual sink part and has masking tape all over it. And the faucet has a plastic bag tied over it. And there's a bucket under the sink. And that's a broken sink at Brooklyn College. And another image is a screenshot from a video, and it says MTA police harassing people for $275, fining $100. And if you're not familiar, the MTA is the bus system or the train system, the public transit system that we have in New York City, and the fare to get on is $275. But if you skip fare and you just hop on the bus, you can get a ticket for $100. So these are 2 images from CUNY Brooklyn College. So that was the Instagram page for stuff that was broken at Brooklyn College. And this was another way of mapping that doesn't require folks sitting down at a table together, but rather just snapping a picture and sending it to an Instagram page. We can go to the next slide. And now we have individual mapping. So the image here is, it says map maker, and it's a screenshot from a zine that we made about austerity in New York City and austerity at CUNY and SUNY campuses. So it was just a little activity that we included in our zine that encouraged folks to map their neighborhoods and document spots like shops, document change in their neighborhoods, just as something that they could do on their own. And that sort of gets you thinking more critically about your surroundings. And then we have verbally mapping, which was, again, something that started off in the really early days of free CUNY meetings as just something to, again, get folks talking, and something that we had to do because we had such concentrated numbers at 2 specific colleges. And it was just asking for report backs from other campuses, just what's happening at your campus, you know, things that you want us to know about, things that even aren't necessarily at your campus or maybe at the neighborhood around you. And this, again, rolled and became something bigger, and it became a very involved process of social media posts that allowed us to interact with students and staff and faculty from campuses where we previously had nobody from free CUNY at, per se. We had no co-organizers there. So this verbal report back, verbal mapping, allowed us to engage with folks at campuses that we otherwise would not have been able to. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. And this is the final part of mapping that I'll talk about. And I like to call this part sources of joy. So this is historical mapping of CUNY's history that was so integral to this group and everything that we do and did. And even as newer folks entered Free CUNY, whether or not they were given like a rundown of CUNY protesting history, this history of CUNY and university protests in general very much influenced the way that we moved. So whether or not they were aware of it, they were acting in the light of the many, many movements that happened before at this college. And this is a way of, another way of mapping, of course, but also a way of political education. And this, I think, along with mapping on a map or even verbally mapping, it's really important to map things that we find joy in, I think. So that's why I included before, just writing down a spot that you like to hang out with your folks. Like that's really important because it reminds you and the people around you of the reasons that you're even working so hard for a university, for a college, that these are still places that that you're able to find joy in, as dorky as it may feel sometimes. It's still really important. And that's why I think mapping sources of joy is also really important when doing any kind of mapping exercises. Yeah, I think that's all I have for mapping.
Thank
Cool.
you so much. Okay, go ahead, Moll.
Cool, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so campus mapping is really important for documenting like spaces on campuses and around campuses that give you joy. They're also really helpful for compiling data, which is less exciting. So I'm going to talk about kind of like how we have gone about compiling data in the past through mapping. So there's kind of like 4 broad categories of information, which is like social media, which Sarah was talking about a little bit, institutional documentation, news articles, and then documenting personal experiences. So I'll kind of like briefly go over how we've used each of those to get a clear idea of like the context of policing and austerity at CUNY. Next slide, please. Cool. So yeah, Sarah kind of already went into this already a little bit, but if you're specifically trying to get some ideas about like how security is operating at your campus, some things that we've found to be helpful is like finding the official counts for campus security and seeing what you can just like glean from the pictures and stuff. There's 2 pictures on this slide. There's one on the bottom left, which is of 3 cops, 2 on bikes and 1 on an RV, I think it is. And then the other image on the top right of the slide is of a flyer that says LaGuardia Reading Room reserved for spring 2020 adjunct office hours only. So for the first picture, which is again of the cops, that was helpful for us just to understand like how ludicrously the school was spending money on equipment for cops like this. And it can help you just get an idea of what that budget might actually be going towards. So you can also find or start accounts that document how austerity or policing is showing up on your campus. Again, like the CUNY Brooklyn College that Sarah was talking about. And then also just like searching keywords on Facebook and Twitter, because sometimes you'll pop up like an old tweet or something. Next slide, please. And then institutional documentation with the asterisk that obviously they could always be lying, misrepresenting, or obscuring information. They're like, for example, at CUNY, we have these reports that they have to release because of the Clary Act, which is supposed to kind of increase reporting of crimes around, of harm around sexual violence. And so our reports at CUNY kind of like will specifically tell you how many cops are being employed by each school. You definitely have to like hunt for it, but it is there. But we weren't able to find those within the CCSF reports. So like how the reports look and what information they have will vary from school to school, even if they're kind of obeying the same Clary Act. But it is helpful to know, like, note what isn't in the reports also, and see if that's something that you can kind of like pressure the school to give you. So the documents are generally very confusing and they use pretty inaccessible language. It can save some time just to find them in the first place by kind of Googling your school name and some keywords like budget, allocation, fiscal year, budget report, etc. We were able to find some reports which we can link to after for CCSF that showed salaries. And then for budget documents, a specific process that we kind of went through. So for researching CUNY campuses, we found various budget reports from the different campuses, and then we kind of just Control F'd to search like key terms, security and safety. And then every time something popped up, we copied and pasted it into a spreadsheet. So this is helpful. It won't necessarily give you like the exact answers that you need, but it's helpful to kind of collect and compile it, and then you have, again, an idea of what is present or lacking from the budget report, and then that kind of gives you further directions for your research. Yeah, so this is like an example that we pulled for CCSF, where we were able to find some, again, like very confusing and inaccessible annual reports, but they are on the website and there is minimal information about the security budget. And then news articles is another great source that I've kind of just recently had an epiphany about. So like campus and city newspapers can be really helpful sources of information, especially because cops and admin might be more willing to share like specific information with reporters, especially if they're trying to get good PR. So definitely like one thing to flag is just making sure if you're looking at articles that are like a few years old that the numbers could be outdated, etc. So there's this example that I have of an article from the Guardsman, which is a CCSF student newspaper, about challenges of being understaffed, and it tells you kind of like roughly what is full capacity for the department, like how many people they're trying to hire. It tells you their shifts if you're trying to organize like actions or something. It tells you what they're armed with. So it can be really helpful to give you like specific numbers that might not show up in those like very inaccessible reports. Next slide, please. And then here's just another example. This was an article that was published like October 6th, I think, and it states like exactly the amount of money that they're going to be spending on body cams over the next 5 years. And it tells you like who submitted the request, which would be helpful. I think if we were mapping this, we would probably map like, okay, there's the police chief and there's the interim chancellor, and like these are two people that have power and that we could potentially like target or put pressure on, etc. And then it tells you like when they're trying to roll out the body cams. Next slide, please. And then the last one is just like, again, to what Sarah was saying, personal experiences of community members. And this is like really important for a number of reasons. The first is just like, it's really helpful and important so that you're not just like redoing work that has already been done. And I think just generally compiling and collecting information makes it more generally accessible to folks, and that's really important. Another thing is just like making sure that you're not only connecting with students, faculty, and staff, but also you're like exploring how folks that are living around the campus, especially in a city, are experiencing the university or university policing, or things like, do they have access to the libraries? Could they take classes, etc.? And then campus mapping can also be just updating each other about what's happening on different departments, like budget cuts or adjunct firings. We had a really cool thing come out of like posting these report backs, which is that we organized like an ethnic studies kind of organizing meeting so that we could all connect with like the different ethnic studies departments across CUNY campuses to kind of get a clearer picture of like what defunding looked like broadly. So that can be really helpful and important for a number of reasons. And I'll pass back to Hailey.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Moll. And this was just like our attempt of like using our method of study, the way like we compiled our own data on like the police at our schools, and then just doing like a very quick dive into CCSF security budgets. And I'm seeing Aira shared, like, of course y'all know your school better than we could possibly ever, you know, so thank you for sharing that. And I'm gonna move on to like ways that we, Sarah shared like one example of the way like of a zine of like campus mapping and timeline creation. On the next slide, I'm gonna share one of our Instagram posts that we made that came out at the same time as our one of our cops off campus protests that happened this summer. And on this page, there are 3 photos, very text heavy. They're all pink. One photo is named CUNY upholds policing through surveillance. The other picture is coordinating the repression. And the last photo is why do we want #cops out of CUNY. So like Sarah mentioned, through our data, we needed to both contextualize it in like the history of you know policing at our campuses. So the first slide talks about like the various ways like surveillance like happens in our school, from you know the surveilling of Muslim students by NYPD officers that were honestly like allowed onto campus, and various other ways. And the next slide has a lot more. The next few pictures has more of the data that we acquired through looking through the budget reports and controlling F and like putting them into like spreadsheets. When we were creating like propaganda for ourselves and like against like cops and pro like abolition, we found it like necessary to like put the numbers of like the budgets against like everything that the rising like budgets for like police every single year against like everything that's being like defunded from our like institution. So the second photo, it says CUNY upholds policing by accumulation through dispossession. It has like the budget for the highest the number for the highest budget at like one of our CUNY campuses, which is Hunter College. And it shows like, okay, we have 1 cop for every 203 students, but we have like 1 mental health counselor for every like almost 3,000 students, right? So it's really important to put those numbers into perspective as a way to always keep in mind that whenever the police budget grows, it's always, you know, next to like the purposeful, you know, depletion of other resources that students actually need. And then the last slide also shows like, okay, CUNY specifically, as like a public institution, is responsible for training state agents. So like the academy or John Jay school, the John Jay campus within CUNY specifically like trains like so many police, as like y'all are familiar with in your own community college. And Moll mentioned like the defunding of the ethnic studies departments in the light of the funding of police is especially like poignant. And the last thing is that having all the cost of cops photo has all of our campuses listed and the budgets for the cops on each of the or public safety on each of the lines. And that's really important because when we're thinking about the many campuses within the public university system or the New York City public university system, each campus is so different in the ways that like policing happens. So we constantly need to be like talking to each other about these things. Policing on like the Kingsborough Community College at a community college looks really different from policing at a four-year college, or and we like they purposefully keep that like the colleges are purposely like kept isolated from each other, and we often don't know like what's happening on each other's campuses, and that's why like campus mapping in that regard through like word of mouth is really important too, and sharing like experiences about policing on campuses is really important. Sorry, that was a long-winded way to kind of summarize like the way we want to talk about policing purposefully. And I'll end there because I think that is our time. If Sarah or Moll want to add anything to this? No? Okay. I'll hand it back to the host then. Thank you so much.
Yes, I just want to say thank you to like Hailey, Sarah, Moll for just first of all for such beautiful slides, and secondly just for like the care that you put into this presentation. I'm actually a grad student at San Francisco State, and like I'm like I need to be looking at budget reports. Like what am I doing? I'm trying to hold this against them. Like I know the president of SF State just got a raise, and like I'm trying to protest and do this, but so I just really appreciate like all of the ideas around that, because it's so true. And just for that reminder, I wrote that down for like map things we find joy in, because like sometimes this organizing work can be really exhausting if we're not continuously finding joy. So thank you for sharing that wisdom, and I'll pass it to Brittany to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you y'all for like Alex put it, sharing your wisdom with us and doing the work across there, and the importance of mapping and seeing where it is abolition affects us, like on a geographical level almost, in the way that it's cross country. So thank you so much for that. But our next presenter is the CCSF Collective and PUSO. CCSF Collective is an abolitionist art activism student-led and initiated collective. PUSO CCSF, or Philippine United Solidarity Organization, is a student group fighting to oust Duterte, and I believe is the president of the Philippines. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And fighting against US imperialism. We are joined by Alexis Yonan and Ira Kine from CCSF Collective, and Win-Mon Kyi for PUSO CCSF, who will discuss abolition in education in collection to their free community college resolution, which passed statewide in March 2020.
Hi guys, I guess I can go ahead and get us started. My name is Alexis. I use she, her pronouns. Just a really quick visual description of me. I'm a light-skinned, mixed-race Asian American woman. I have black hair that's tied up in kind of a loose ponytail. I have a pair of white headphones on, and I'm wearing a gray sweatshirt. The background behind me, you can kind of see a little bit of some green plants. I have like a little bit of a glow just slightly above my head from the overhead light. Apologies to anyone if that's distracting in any way. And then I do have like a little picture on the side of my wall and a towel that my boyfriend left hanging on the side of the door from earlier today that I was too lazy to take off. So I guess I can go ahead and start sharing my screen just to jump into the presentation for you guys. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good, Alexis.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I get like so nervous having to like speak in front of groups of people and do these kinds of presentations. So I'm gonna like brush through this really quickly before I would just pass it on to Winmon and Era. Okay. So really quickly, just wanted to go over this free college for all education overview. The purpose behind the document was to give just kind of a brief overview of education and how to centralize and update information. This was kind of like a working doc that we had going while we were working on the resolutions, while we were getting ready to submit. And as someone who had basically no experience with this type of work before getting involved with the writing of the resolutions, it was personally like a really helpful guide for me to understand what we were doing and really help to put it in a broader context. So if I could just start at the bottom. This particular list was really helpful for me just in terms of getting to understand what was going to happen with our resolutions. They initially have to pass through the SSCCC, which stands for the Student Senate of California Community Colleges. Delegates vote to pass the resolution. The SSCCC is the student representation of all 116 colleges split up into 10 regions. So after the resolution passes, it would move up to the California Community College Board of Governors. From there, the 9 divisions led by the vice chancellors, Chancellor Eloy Oakley. And then from there up, it would go to the California State Assembly, the Committee on Revenue and Taxation, up to the highest chain of command in the state of California, which would be Governor Gavin Newsom. Let's see. I'm also going to go ahead after the presentation and share the link on the Student Senate of California Community Colleges final resolutions packet, just to give everyone just kind of a general idea of the adopted resolutions that have passed this past spring. We have resolutions on disabled student awareness, affordable low-income housing, free period products and movement towards menstrual equity, term limits for California school districts, advocacy for ethnic studies, minimum qualifications for SBA advisor, menstrual sustainability, access and equity, establishment of gender studies requirement, bolstering student participation in shared governance, et cetera, et cetera. And it's honestly just like really inspiring to see all of these different groups from community colleges all over the state kind of pushing for things that really are aligned with the work that we've been doing here at City College of San Francisco. So really quickly, I'm just going to go into the presentation and read that off. The language around this also is kind of funny. The kind of whereas and resolved for me seemed really confusing at first. Whereas is basically like a proposed issue that we want to bring attention to, and resolved before the little writing at the end stands for like a proposed solution to the previous problems that have been presented. And I'll just go ahead and read them off really quickly. 51% of the student body are underrepresented students, and the community college education system has been historically underfunded and privatized through divestment, austerity cuts, and downsizing because of current funding avenues. Basically, just to break down a lot of previous issues around the corporatization and privatization of the education system, which I know Debbie Klein also spoke in depth about on Monday and did a really amazing job of breaking that down. The current climate of civil rights, the push for public resources to rectify socioeconomic disparities indicates a need for tuition-free education in all 116 California community colleges by working with local city governments, which is actually something that we ended up doing for Free City College in San Francisco that has actually gone on to benefit so many marginalized low-income students, including myself. The Free City program for City College of San Francisco has successfully been implemented in 2017, making community college free for all San Francisco residents from the use of city property taxes to provide free tuition and resources through the Prop W measure. The student-centered funding formula, SCFF, may penalize low enrollment, resulting in further loss of accreditation, and financial barriers could cause low enrollment, so seeking alternative funding can both increase enrollment and the overall economy as a community college system is the largest workforce training provider for the 2 million students facing financial hardship due to COVID-19, with students attending or graduating doubling chances of employment. Therefore, it should be resolved that the Student Senate for California Community Colleges will develop an action plan for free tuition through alternative funding in collaboration with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and including a statement in support of ethnic studies, other relevant studies, and free education. So we really did want to make a point that free tuition really is just a jumping off point in terms of bringing greater access to higher education within marginalized communities. Free tuition is one thing, but we really do want to make sure that colleges all over the state of California have the proper funding for resources on campus as well. Resolved that the Student Senate for California Community Colleges support any initiatives, campaigns, and reforms that advocate for free education, redirect funding for police and military towards universal education, and advocate for ethnic studies and other relevant education initiatives. So this does kind of tie into a lot of the campus mapping that CUNY was talking about. We want to be really mindful of the funds that are already being directed at California community colleges and community colleges all over the country, that so much unnecessary funding is getting put into police and military efforts, particularly where they kind of relate to community college campuses. And a lot of that funding could be better spent if we're putting it towards ethnic studies and other relevant education initiatives throughout college campuses. The Student Senate for California Community Colleges advocate to have the student-centered funding formula steer away from performance-based funding and make assessments on how the student-centered funding formula has affected vulnerable student populations and community colleges. So this is kind of a big one. I didn't even have a full understanding of what performance-based funding was before I started working with Era and Winmon on this resolution packet, but it's basically a policy in which schools base their funding off of how well schools perform, and that performance, is generally judged by transfer or graduation rates, which obviously in a community college where not every student there has the goal of going on to transfer to a four-year university, and there is something to be said for like lifelong learning. So these kind of perceived failures of the schools having to do with transfer rates or graduation rates can often lead to issues that turn into this bigger self-fulfilling prophecy that doesn't really do anything to solve problems that are occurring on campuses. And at the end of the day, students and faculty are really the people who lose out on situations like that. The last resolution that we wanted to include was that the Student Senate for California Community Colleges advocates that all students, regardless of immigration, resident, and citizenship status, are included in this tuition-free program. So although Free City College is an amazing thing that we have here in San Francisco, unfortunately, it only extends to San Francisco residents, which can be kind of a bummer even within the broader community of the Bay Area, because it's an extremely expensive place to live. And I know that if residency didn't act as this kind of barrier in terms of access for people who are maybe thinking about going back to school and don't have the money to do so, it would really just make the biggest difference. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Winmon.
Hi everyone, I'm Win, she, hers. Era is gonna help me like screen share, and thank you Alexis, and thank you to the Abolition 101 course. And I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and thank you so much like Free CUNY for holding it down on the East Coast for free education. Super exciting to be with everyone today. So I think the resolution that, first of all, I'd want to state that, part of the question that's going to be posed later is like reimagining systems and education. And just want to share that the fight and struggle at CCSF, a lot of imagining is always happening, including in times where we've been forced to think a certain way. And I think this fight has been a way to pave for others and have been paving a way for other institutions to reframe education. So this is also part of the historical knowledge and the historical fight that students and the community carry on from the past, the legacy, and to the present and to the future. So right here, Free City, it's a movement and offensive, right? A vision for a just education. And so we have here kind of prop or propaganda of Prop W, Proposition W, which was a campaign that we put on the San Francisco ballot to be able to be voted upon by San Francisco voters to pass the resolution for free education. So what is this? Let's move back a little more. Okay, next slide, please. So first of all, it's why are we fighting in the first place? Well, this in San Francisco is really, really appalling, right? What is considered low income? It's 117K per year, and very low income is 73K. This is what the context that we're building it at this, working with at that time, which is absurd. And then the description here I'd want to provide is that there's two maps, okay? One map is red that outlines in the neighborhoods, right? What's the average rent? And then I guess a visual for me, by the way, as I'm sharing this is I have long hair, and then my background, my Zoom background says, let us be the last generation under dictatorship. I'm also medium brown skin, and then me ethnically I'm from Myanmar, Burma, wearing a speckled dress, and I hope that describes me. And so for this, and then the other map shows, check it out, we have 9 campuses with throughout the city of San Francisco. So one is a map of where all the campuses are in different historical neighborhoods in SF, and the other map overlays on how much rent is in the average rent is in the different areas. So if you so taking that in, it's we kind of see that landscape, right, of what we're working with. Pretty absurd. Next slide, please. So here we have exactly, right? It's who, I can't believe, low income is considered 117K. So it points out to the wealth disparity, and the density of that time in that period was that San Francisco has the highest density of billionaires, not even millionaires, but billionaires. And so in this fight, what we're linking is gentrification. In this time, CCSF was so-called in the SF Chronicle and by the National Education Agenda that it was too big, right? Where it actually opposed our vision for CCSF was, it should be big, it should be everyone, it should be free, it not just affordable, but free. So we have a picture on the right where 3 African-American students, CCSF students, are holding the banner that says "Cuts to City College equals gentrification." And then on the, oops, sorry, I think that's the right, yeah. And then on the left photo, it shows majority POC students leading a walkout, denouncing the cuts to diversity studies, to which people were outright fighting back, along with faculty and community, because that was also really absurd. So a vision for public education is not just a free one as well, but also a vision for what we want to be taught and how we want to learn with others, and what benefits our respective communities. Next is that CCSF was under a manufactured crisis. So what this outlines is what is the definition of a state takeover, right? So we have one, we're facing defunding of the education from the state of California, divestment of like 5 billion at that time, right? So there's already like a condition placed on us that there's like a scarcity. But second is that the problem is placed on the individuals, like it's our fault, you know? And so like it's students' fault, it's faculty fault, it's community's fault. And it puts us in a position that they want to frame is that we're fighting for crumbs, right? And then third is a key characteristic of a manufactured crisis, whether it be any public sphere in water and health, and here it's education, is to strip the democratic processes to allow for the implementation of neoliberal policies. So you have people that are like appointed, right? That like we've never seen them, like they don't even come on campus, like they like these officials that are dictating what students need and want when where that's far from the truth, right? Instead, they're put in place to implement neoliberal policies and so-called provide solutions. And another condition that's set is the firing, you know, the precarized labor, so more like adjunct faculty, right? So it's like people who make and really work and fight for the college are put to be like displaced or disposable. Next, please. Next slide, please. And so what it takes, so in this, there's like 3 different photos, and it took mass mobilizations to shut down this accreditation commission, which was shutting down over 113, which was accrediting 113 community colleges throughout the state of California. And so this is the context, again, we were working with was like, we were fighting against a shutdown that was in the conflict of interest of the ACCJC. They were desperately trying to shut us down, make our campuses smaller, push out students. And unfortunately, they did displace a third of the CCSF population. And yet we're still here, right? We're still fighting back. So I'll move through a little more quickly. Again, more pictures of students in mass mobilizations, doing banner drops, posters, teach-ins, walkouts to end the neoliberal policies and against privatization. Next slide, please. And our call was, again, no class cancellations, no faculty layoffs, and no downsizing. And so Free City was an offensive within this fight at CCSF. And we have more pictures on like, you know, what it took to like wage this campaign, right? But what we know, as Alexis said, this fight isn't over, meaning to say, right, it still serves, right, only like SF residents. And at that time, it was like students pushing at the forefront, like, hey, what about undocumented students? You know, what about like what about international students, right? And trying to push in the mechanisms, the democratic mechanisms in Prop W to be able to expand this initiative, expand the who would be able to get these resources. Next slide. Yeah, and so a lot of in the beginning there was a lot of confusion, like who's going to pay for it, etc. And what it actually is a progressive tax. So it only taxes like on luxury properties of 5% of the transfer tax. Yeah, the transfer rate that goes from the luxury properties. And so our main call is still today, no cuts, no fees, education must be free. And I think that's there's like protests and rallies at Civic Center that are of like different students and faculty and like community members that are holding up signs that says education must be free. And I think last thing I'd wanted to share is like, while this campaign was back in 2017 to 20, and the Free Seed program was implemented like 2019, the significance of it was that it demonstrated what is possible. but also it demonstrated a lot of like, weaknesses and obstacles that can provide lessons to like education fights throughout the state and the nation. And so so back to like the resolution that Ira, Alexis, and I had like drawn up, while most community colleges may not have the conditions to like tax luxury properties, we can find ways to like strategize and continue that fight and work with any way we can. Thanks everyone, and I'll pass it off to Ira.
Hey everyone, can people hear me? Nice, okay. So just to give a visual description or introduce myself, my name is Era. I use she, her pronouns. I am a fair-skinned, able-bodied cis woman from the Vietnamese Chinese diaspora. And I have long black witchy hair, earrings, and a white tank, and a murky brownish background. Thank you, Alexis and Win, for spending time today to do this presentation along with CUNY. I think something that was to be mentioned is, although this resolution for free education passed earlier on, I think it was last year, or was it this year? I feel like my years are getting mixed up. I think it was earlier on this year in March. Something that needs to be done is they need to start implementing the action items, because there's a possibility where they let it sunrise, where they neglected for 3 years and they just move on. So a part of it is holding the SSCCC accountable to passing free education for all, and defunding from the police and demilitarization. So what I'm gonna do for my presentation is I'm gonna sort of examine, let me just let it load. As we approach education, I think it's important to examine 3 different aspects, which is what the current system normalizes, what hierarchies are maintained through education, how the credibility and desirability of public education ties into capitalism, and how can we reimagine education while abolishing the academic industrial complex. And I'll sort of share alternatives to public education too. So the first part is how the community college system maintains certain hierarchies. I'm unable to go through all of them due to the interest of time. I'll show a slideshow of this later on, but then one aspect is that it's very ableist. It's focused on a performance based on test results, time settings, uniform class structures that do not support different learning styles, standardized academic pathways created to support those that are able-bodied and neurotypical in a cis hetero white ableist type of system. There are ableist metrics that determine success and intelligence. I think as you examine or think about, as you reflect on schools and how much time you spend in your life at schools, it's also how these metrics in turn define what the norm is. And the orange checks are just examples of how it relates to City College, where, for example, DSPS, which supports disabled students, was cut by 40% in 2021. There's institutionalized racism, where white supremacy is upheld with a Eurocentric curriculum. There's lack of BIPOC faculty and staff, alongside with a dearth of cultural competency programs that support students. So one example of this is earlier on this year, during that whole 600 layoffs fiasco, of the Black part-time faculty, 81% were about to be laid off. Of the Black full-time faculty, 43% were to be laid off. And thankfully, people protested, and AFT, or the faculty, had to take pay cuts to prevent the layoffs from happening. There are also cultural elements where, as CUNY mentioned, campus police are in charge of safety and security. The criminalization arrests occur at colleges, but then also at elementary schools and post-secondary schools, such as middle schools and high schools. When it comes directly to City College, it's the Administration of Justice Department that directly trains police and other cultural employment, such as the parole officers too. And it sort of brings us back to the premise behind this community project, which is how the California community college system trains 80% of the state's entire police force. Another aspect is the neoliberal portion of it, which is, I think you already know, the trustees are pretty much politicians. They just see City College as their playground, just due to the track record of downsizing City College. And something that is going to segue into my second point is the capitalist connections too, where these schools and universities, be it community colleges or 2 years or 4 years, they create certificates and jobs that serve a capitalist agenda. So when we think about getting rid of the PIC or the prison industrial complex, is also being aware that we're in a system itself, right? What are we perpetuating? I love how Free CUNY also brought it back to the budget. For CCSF budget, we have 6-figure salaries for the top administration for consultants. I remember Tamia mentioning that it's very much like a values chart, the budget, and whatever's prioritized, it's what's at the highest level for the entire school. And typically that's the top administration, right? I mentioned student debt because although community college students don't necessarily incur debt, due to the whole corporate agenda that Win-Mon was mentioning and Deborah mentioned on Monday, community colleges are getting downsized. And because of that, a lot of the most vulnerable students are getting pushed out to 2-year or 4-year universities and have to take student loans that in turn create student debt, which I believe Alex will talk more about in the upcoming session. A direct relationship that this has with CCSF is just recently, they're going to partner up with the Department of Workforce. And that leads into this idea of contract education. It's not only CCSF, but then other community colleges that are partnering with like that department in the respective cities. So again, it's further corporatizing what education is. I'm going to skip that because of time. But then my second point is these ableist ideas of credibility and desirability. It's connected to education and in turn how it funnels capitalism too. It was shared that the community college is the largest provider of workforce training, where it's also the largest system of higher education in the country, which is essentially stating that it's a large powerhouse. It's a direct pipeline to capitalism, right? Where if you think about it, we create these certificates, these majors that in turn create careers and that maintain certain industries that aren't the most harmless in our world. When it comes to desirability, it's another ableist idea, which for most of us, since we are placed in the system since kindergarten, right? Since we're 5 years old, we base our identities on, as we grow, on what we're studying. Like, what do you want to be? In turn, what's your job? I'm sure like we all hear these questions as we move around socially, right? And essentially that's highlighting what's your worth? What's the value that you have as a person? Below, I mentioned different aspects of credibility, and I'm just thinking about the different ways that education as it is right now, our public education, is legitimized through ideas such as accreditation, degrees, and certificates. That sort of puts us in the cycle of relying on public ed and the whole corporate system. So I'm curious about how that gets flipped, right? Where if schools are able to turn out jobs, how could we be intentional with what is being created and how? How can this credibility that schools, the state, the government have the power to create, such as by providing degrees, be something mutual aid groups or community have instead, right? Something that comes to mind is one of our goals of creating a abolitionist community safety training program, but then how are we being intentional over who has the power over it? Because ultimately it shouldn't be the Board of Trustees overseeing that whole program. And lastly, it's how can we reimagine education, such as learning, while abolishing the academic industrial complex, specifically regarding power, such as what power structures shape CCSF or the California Community College system. How can those structures and systems be dismantled to be based on a power with abolitionist foundation with community instead? And again, this sort of is like a part B to Monday's session on the industrial complex. It's really, as we try to abolish the police and prisons and we try to center care, how are we also doing that within our own system too of schools? I know I'm talking really fast. I hope it's people can understand me, but then we ideally want to move towards community-powered, self-determined alternatives, right? There's that aspect of chipping away at the existing power structure within the California community college system or other public ed systems, but then also how do we also create things from the ground up, which I think is probably the most powerful. An example is historically freedom schools. They have a long history of liberatory education designed for people to dismantle the oppressive structures right now. Right now, there's Chicago Freedom School, which started, I think, in 2018. Mario Cava is one of the founders. Institute for Healing and Justice in Oakland just as how there's the medical industrial complex and med school, this is a alternative to med school. And of course, for like the kids, Abundant Beginnings Collective in Oakland. And although this one moves towards, they mentioned wanting to move towards a nonprofit model, which we talked about like not trying to do. I think it's really great how essentially in reimagining alternatives to public education, it's how you're creating your own ecosystem. And I think this is what they're really fostering in their collective.
Yeah, thank you, Alexis, Winmon, and Ara. I personally found that so informative and learned so much about like the intricacies of fighting for education as a human right. And I especially loved, Ara, the breakdown that you just had about the hierarchies and how we maintain that and how that kind of ties into abolition as a whole when we fight for education. So thank you so much. That was so beautiful. We are going to go into a break now, but to be mindful for time, it is going to be a 5-minute break instead of 10. So we are going to return at 7:20, and then from there, we're going to do the Q&A and breakout rooms and everything. Okay.
Welcome back, folks. Our folks are slowly coming back from break. Given the time we have, I definitely want to get to this question portion. So we will now begin our 10-minute question Q&A for BIPOC class members. If BIPOC folks, please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or type something in the chat to let us know if you'd like to speak or that you'd like to have your question read out loud for you. We will open it up for questions for everyone in the last 5 minutes. After Q&A, we will go into breakout room discussion. Please remember to send a message to the person marked as host to let them know if you are white so that we can arrange the breakout rooms accordingly. So I want to get into questions, and I'm sure a lot of folks have really awesome questions. I know I do, but I think, a question we start for all of our presenters is, and this is for anyone to start us off with, is in your wildest dreams, how do you imagine creating an abolitionist world, and how does this overlap with CCSF? And I could put the question in the chat too, if that's helpful.
I think that a couple of people hopped off.
Yeah, I think our presenters are still on though. Yeah, cool. I see Hailey and Sarah and Alexis. Yeah, if folks are interested in sharing, just like what does an abolitionist world look like to you, and especially like in alignment with free education.
I can kind of start us off if that's okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Hailey, did you want to go first?
Oh, go for it.
Okay. I'll keep it really brief too, because I feel like my kind of vision for like a future that I see is always kind of shifting and changing. But like one major component for me, as someone who hasn't always had like affordable resources available to me, is access. So like true access, free education all over the world. And I mean the kind of access to education that's really going to like foster a community of people who feel safe in that environment, and like willing to kind of like collaborate and work collectively and share skills, like really similar to the model of this abolition class that we've been attending on a weekly basis. But yeah, just kind of like a very brief description.
Let me think. Thinking about Ara's presentation about, education that is separate from like the public education model that we have right now, or this very like institutionalized version of like public education is like thinking about the spaces that Sarah talked about that like they give us joy, like spaces that we hang out. And those spaces that we hang out in are also spaces that we learn in together, or we like, you know, we're allowed to like ask questions and explore these ideas. And those spaces are often like the most precarious ones because of like public education. Like Sarah knows, like the room that we hang out in is always like, it's going to be defunded now, you know, watch out. Or, you know, the space, the farm that I worked on, defunded, you know, but that was also the space where I did most of my learning. So it's really, in my wildest dreams, it sucks because those dreams are also so, you know, threatened by like the you know, institution itself. But my wildest dreams would be these spaces of joy, like unbounded by public, like the threat of like it becoming, you know, disappearing, you know, in a second. Not that I need things to be like stay here forever, but you know what I mean. I'll pass it on to the other speakers.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I was thinking about like after graduating, it's been sort of a different like a different lens I get to look through college at now, and I guess like learning in general, and being now a teaching assistant in classes that I've taken. It's sort of again like shifts my perspective even further, where I'm so unconvinced by like grading and things like that now. It's so it's like my perspective is not that I was like really hardcore pro grading before or anything, but it just makes it so much clearer now how subjective and how strange the whole like grading system is. And I think that feeds back into what folks were talking about before about this being like an institution to push out workers. And I guess in my wildest dreams, it would be a place that like folks can come to learn, and I guess have it end there, and have there not be a need for something to come after that, after like getting to learn things. Because that whether we want to admit it or not, it's kind of fun to learn new things, and maybe the classroom structure is the only way we've done it, and so it feels so so much more like regimented, and I think we all like have felt at some point like just all the fun of it being sucked out because of the way that we learn. So I guess one part of my wildest dreams would be removing like these things that hang over our heads when we're in a classroom, or like you all were mentioning before, like the freedom schools is like another mode of learning. Like I think that's also I think that would be really interesting, and I think better for like all of us if we like remove those things from learning.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, such amazing answers. I think in my wildest dreams, I'm hearing a lot of different interconnectedness between everything, not only in the space within, with all the other sessions. I see it like all of our answers just interlinking with each other, how we're creating like all these different spaces and relationships, and these skill sets where from school, our learning spaces, from our workspaces, from our social circles down to our families, like those systems are those spaces and relationships are so powerful, and we have enough skills that if something happens in your family and then someone hurts someone in your family, I hope like we have the skills to address that, you know, and if your family doesn't have the skills, then your friends do, because they have the skill sets trained. And if it's not your that community space, it's your neighborhood space, right? It's so many different people they could turn to, because I really think that's so necessary, because no one in your family should hurt another family member. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so invested in abolition, which is such a paradigm shift for me. I think about it on a family level, because I hear so many stories from so many different people and how their family's hurting because of they don't have that care in place. In regards to the overlap, I think being specific over what could be done in school settings, what could be changed and transformed, combined with how we're building up other spaces, because let's be real, school settings are microcosms. We could really reflect the world that we want, so we could build towards that too. I am aware that we also have to center the most impacted people. Like, I'd love for us to talk to the Rami Toshaloni and talk about land liberation when it comes to also dismantling the current education system, or even other Indigenous communities. I would love for us to keep building this overlap, because I know, like, for the cohort members and even Free CUNY too, we still need to be in community with each other. So I see it as also like being able to share a meal together, because I love be able to have conversations and dialogue with y'all and just understand fully what you all have in mind, because I learned so much from different people in the space, not just the coordinators, but then just the speakers and like the cohort members themselves.
Yeah, thank you, Ira, and everyone that, yeah, Ira. So sorry, I'm like, yes, I'm going to work on that. Yeah, I just really want to highlight something you said at the end about like interdependence, and yeah, like this ecosystem that we're building with one another, right, with our comrades in the East Coast to where we are. And yeah, I heard a comrade of mine the other day say that abolition is the practice of liberation, and it's just, I haven't stopped thinking about that since. Yeah, I don't know if we have any more time for questions, or if we should move on to other questions. I'll just pass it to Brittany.
Thanks. Yeah, so maybe if anyone else has any questions, we do have the 5 minutes for everyone else. We could open it up. But if we don't have questions, we can go into breakout rooms. So I think just to be mindful of the space, we'll have 5 more minutes for the Q&A. But thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. Sean, I see you raised your hand.
No, it's okay. It was just a comment that I was thinking about, and I don't know how to like voice it, you know, like it was a disagreement and I don't know how to voice it in a correct way. So I'm like finna pass, you know?
Okay. If you find a way to voice it, then let us know. You're also welcome to put it in the chat and we'll read it.
One of Moll, who was here earlier from Free CUNY, had to leave because they have to work on a paper for class tomorrow. But they had a question about capacity and how folks are like doing with I guess dividing labor and stuff when they're working. And I imagine, as it did with Free CUNY and it affected me as well, with my ability to with our ability to manage labor and stuff. So I'm wondering if y'all have any thoughts or like anything to share about that.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone from the CCSF Collective have any thoughts?
Yeah, I could respond to that. I think that has been an issue too, where it's been rapid fire response. We always felt like we're in an urgency. And it's clear that that's, I think, designed, like there's always something parceled out, there's always something that needs to be addressed. And just taking time to pace ourselves and be mindful of disability justice, where we center those that are most in need and have access needs. For instance, there were certain things that were like time sensitive, or like, okay, no, it's fine for us to wait and pace it out. I think as I'm reflecting, before we started with this idea of having coordinators, but I'm understanding that we shouldn't do that anymore, where we base it off of like a collective setting versus a core group of people that could have responsibilities. And I'm curious to hear if Alexis have any answers too.
One thing that definitely comes to mind, and this is something that I think about a lot too, because I feel like something that we're all very aware of right now is the fact that a lot of us are having to deal with like our own kind of personal things that are happening on top of having to readjust to life in the real world post-pandemic. And I've been thinking a lot lately just about like outreach and how getting involved in groups like these or collectives or like even just smaller grassroots community organizations can initially feel like this really scary thing, especially for people who don't really have any previous experience like working collectively in a group. So I guess for me, like, if there's anything that I really want to encourage people to do is just to like feel empowered to reach out and get involved in whatever way, shape, or form they're able to. And I know that we do, at least in the CCSF Collective, like try to be really like warm and mindful and understanding of people's capacity levels. And so something that we do pretty often is kind of like check in with each other about the level at which we're able to kind of perform, because rest has to be like one of the most important parts of this practice.
Thank you, Alexis and Era. Well, now I think we can go into breakout rooms since this wraps up the Q&A. Thank you all so much for your wisdom and for doing what needs to be done and fighting for education. Alex, did you have anything else to add or share? I know you're involved in this kind of organizing.
I guess no, just nothing to say that hasn't already been said, other than like, yeah, really grateful to share space with all of you in the ways that we're imagining education. I think I've done a lot of like I know a lot of like historical foundation of like where college came from, and it's like deeply rooted in like white supremacy, the patriarchy, our proximity to whiteness. And so I think, yeah, I often am dreaming of like a world that is so separate of capitalism and colonialism and just like this, white supremacy, white power. And it feels like something is being built here. So thank you all.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so now we're going to go into breakout rooms until 7:55. So if at any time you feel uncomfortable in your breakout room, you can return to the main session. Presenters, you're welcome to stay and join the breakout rooms, but it's fine if you leave. So thank you so much. And you should be getting notification to go into your breakout room at this time. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in the breakout rooms. I apologize to those that may have been cut off when we came back to the main session. We're just trying to be mindful of time because we want to finish before 8. We want to give each of the groups a chance to report back, whether you designated someone specific in your group to report back or not. I believe we had 3 or 4 breakout rooms But if anyone feels called to go first and kind of give us a little, synopsis of what the points that were brought up in your group, and kind of, some connections that were made. And if you like, you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
I can talk a bit about our group. We talked about a lot of different things, but of course they were all related. We talked about whether or not abolishing the university is a way of abolition in the university, the end of the university, or rather transform the university or our campuses even into like places where we can grow things like farming but also growing like community through connecting back with the land, and like centering Indigenous folks in our work in a meaningful way that isn't just even though like land acknowledgements are still important, but it's more than just speaking at certain events and saying land acknowledgements. And we also talked about the sort of symbols, I guess, of the gates and things like that across universities that work to keep students separate or like create a dichotomy of students and then community members, and sort of removing the identities of students and again pushing them out from the university to work and things like that. I'm sure someone else in my group can talk more about things that I missed.
Thank you, Sarah. I found some connections between that and what we spoke about in our group, like around like what Ava mentioned about desirability and credibility and stuff. I know Sean is the undercore back in our group. If you want to go, Sean, make connections there.
Thank you for calling on me, because I was gonna wait till the last time. It was more of like how education can be really abolitionist, because like for like not producing labor for the capitalist society that we all live in, right? It's separating itself from capitalism, which it really cannot do, right? For the simple fact that it really legitimately is completely tied to capitalism, right? Without education, right? I mean, without capitalism or without education, you wouldn't create workers for capitalism. And one of the points that like I mentioned, right? I'm just trying to figure out how to like put this all together, but it was more of like how like people go to school to become certain these workers, right? To become a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer. Like I'm in school, like I'm about to go to law school. I have to go to law school in order to be a lawyer. Like I have to do that. And that costs a shit ton of money that a lot of us don't really have. And it's just more like, how do we make sure to like just create education for the sake of education? You know what I mean? It's literally just that important, rather than creating education to or having education to grant degrees and people to hold power. Like if you think about it, most of the people in the world or in America that have degrees are white people, right? And that, well, no, actually the highest, I take that back. It's actually really current now. The most educated group is actually Black women, right? That's actually a fact. Look that shit up, right? Hella proud. But they're still the least paid, one of the least paid that there are. But at the end of the day, what I was saying is, at one point, the most educated ones tended to be white people, right? And that's capitalism too. That's reinforcing this stereotype. I mean, not this system. So yeah, I hope I like got everybody's point. Like I really tried.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Sean. We have a couple more groups. Does anyone else want to share add on to the points I brought up already?
I can go. So, well, this is so interesting to hear everyone's thoughts. I'm Micah, by the way. Hi, Free CUNY. Thank you for coming and being here and for sharing all your wisdom. And for being here hella late, East Coast time. It's appreciated.
They don't sleep.
What do you visual description is I'm a white person with some facial hair, and my hair is in a side knot, and just a blank background, and my cat's on my lap. You can kind of see her. So we talked about how the college itself, like the institution, can't be abolitionist because it has a rotten foundation for all the reasons that we all talked about, but that like through it we can sort of redirect and create spaces and interactions and like learning that we take with us in our lives with each other, and that can be abolitionist, like that we can use the space of City College or CUNY as a, like, and the resources, because it's like the closest that a college will come to actually like having resources that serve the people, you know, not just people who are there because of legacy or because of like a certain amount of economic or racial privilege and power, like other universities. So we talked mostly about like what it would look like to return power to the people, to actually divert money from the college to fund like classes or spaces like this, you know, which is like a lot of intense volunteer work that the coordinators should be getting paid for, you know. And also just that in order to make things more, in order to allow for like the sustainability of and like continuation of spaces like this, it requires more engagement from everybody with the college's decision system, and that requires more accessible information and also knowledge about how to participate. And of course it requires a changing of the system, which is like a whole big another thing. But that was what the group Conrad and Matthew and I talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. I think that was a beautiful wrap up here. Like, especially like we said, that the foundation is rotten, and we had to consider that when looking at the whole system. But I think that pretty much wraps up our report back for breakout rooms. Thank you again to all of our presenters and for everyone for holding space with us today and informing us and kind of continuing our work with abolition in a way that's so central to creating like education equity. So that's it for tonight. Thanks y'all so much. And again, thank you to CUNY for staying up late with us and sharing your wisdom here tonight.